This is Peru, a country of approximately 1.2 million square kilometers. However, it should be said that this is a fairly recent map. To know the whole story of how it came to be what it is now, we would have to go back in time about 5,000 years before Christ. Can I steal a few minutes of your time? All right then, let's get started. The first American civilization is believed to have originated in Barranca. The response is 108 miles north of Lima. This was known as Caral. The Caral engaged in fishing and farming in the Supe River basins. For the construction of their temples and buildings, they used the technique of zikras, which were bags made of vegetable fiber filled with rocks of different sizes. Around 1800 BC, the Caral settlements were apparently abandoned due to natural disasters such as the El Niño phenomenon and probable earthquakes. The inhabitants had to withdraw and evacuate to other areas such as Sichin in Casma, Huaricoto in Ancash, and Codos in Huánuco, where elements of Caral technology were found. That's why many historians consider Caral to be the focus of Andean civilization. I'll now bring up a topic you've learned in school. The history of Peru, from the archaic period of Caral until the Spanish conquest, is split into 3 horizons and 2 intermediates. 5 periods we'll discuss briefly. The first is the early horizon, which spans between the years 1500 and 500 BC. During this period, 2 major cultures stand out. We have Paracas, in present-day Ica, from 700 to 200 BC, which in turn is divided into 2 major periods. The Paracas Caverna, where they were characterized by burying their dead through funeral bundles with various offerings inside them, and Paracas Necropolis. Indeed, the Paracas were great doctors, and this can be evidenced in the famous cranial trepanations. On the other hand, we have the Chavin culture, between 1200 and 300 BC, which expanded from Lambayeque to Palpa, in Ica, or also part of the Peruvian highlands. Chavin's ecological findings are astounding. The monolithic spear, the Tello obelisk, the Raimondi star, and the well-known clava heads. We then move on to the early intermediate period, between 500 BC and 700 AD. On one hand, we have the Nazca culture, again in Ica, between 100 and 800 AD. And yes, I know what's on your mind, the famous Nazca lines, whose meaning is still a mystery. The Moche or Mochica culture, which occupied modern-day Trujillo extending to Piura, was another significant culture of this era. What was the Moche's expertise? In their architecture, they built large structures like the Huaca of the sun and the moon. In addition, they are considered the best potters of ancient Peru. The renowned portrait Huacos are a highlight of their works. The Lord of Zipan was notably one of their most prominent rulers. We then move on to the middle horizon. The period from 700 to 1000 AD was a time of significant expansions with notable cultures like Tiahuanaco in the southern Sierra, which we'll elaborate in the Bolivia history video, and the Wari culture, spanning from Lambayeque to Moquegua, covering a large part of Peru's central Sierra. During the horizons, the expansion is significantly larger. So what makes the Wari culture distinct? Many historians claim that it is the first great empire of South America, as its great expansion was due not only to military conquests, but also to a process of assimilation of various peoples to the administration of the Wari culture, imposing their religion and government. Like every great empire, Wari begins its decline at the end of the 11th century, thus giving way to the late intermediate period, between 1000 and 1400 AD. In this last intermediate period, the Chimu culture stands out, which is believed to be the successor of Mochica due to the similar location, but this time expanding from the Huarmey Valley to Tumbes. The Chimu excel in ceramics, textiles, and metallurgy. Yes, this is where the famous Tumi come from, as well as in architecture, and this can be corroborated if you visit the amazing city of Chanchan. We reach the much-anticipated late horizon of pre-Hispanic history, including the renowned Inca Empire. Known as the most significant pre-Columbian empire in South America, it originated from the Quechua civilization in present-day Cusco. Its origins date back to the foundation of the empire by the first Inca Manco Capac, around the year 1200, with its capital in Cusco. He was succeeded by a series of Incas who expanded the territory. The Great Expansion began with the 9th Inca Pachacuti, between 1478 and 1471, thus managing to subdue the Cañaris in present-day Ecuador. To the south, he subdued the Aymara kingdoms, which occupied the areas of present-day Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina. So now, we will need a bigger map. Indeed, this empire controlled territories from Ecuador to northern modern-day Argentina. Pachacutec is viewed as the first Inca of Tawantinsuyo, and from here, the empire was divided into the known four Suyos. Chinchal-Suyo was to the north, Contisuyo and Antisuyo central, and Coya-Suyo to the south. The empire's decline began with Huayna Capac's death, and the subsequent power struggle between his sons, Huáscar and Atahualpa. Coincidentally, the Spaniards under Francisco Pizarro arrived during this time. They exploited the conflict and allied with oppressed peoples, eventually conquering Peru by killing Atahualpa in Cajamarca in 1533. Upon establishment, the Viceroyalty of Peru initially occupied this vast territory encompassing most of South America. In these, the highest authority was the Viceroy, who was the personal representative of the King of Spain, the first of them being Blasco Núñez de Vela. Subsequently, new viceroyalties were created, such as that of the Rio de la Plata in the south and New Granada in the north, leaving the territory of the Viceroyalty of Peru reduced to this map with its capital in the city of Los Reyes, which in the future would be the city of Lima. And meanwhile, what was happening with the indigenous peoples of Peru? Well, the indigenous people were subjected to a system of maita where they performed forced labor for low wages. The Catholic religion was imposed on them, and their rights were crushed in every sense. But what an abuse, right? After centuries of repression and measures that did not please the inhabitants of the Viceroyalty at all, such as the Bourbon reforms, the inequality of rights between Spaniards and Peruvians, that is, children of Spaniards born in Peru, generated in the Peruvian people a feeling of seeking emancipation that led to a series of revolts, such as that of the well-known Tupac Amaru II. And this feeling of seeking freedom was also reflected in the other viceroyalties, which gradually gained independence thanks to some factors in their favor, such as the weakening of the Spanish crown, who at that time was fighting in the Napoleonic Wars. But Peru's independence did not come until 1821 when, thanks to the support of liberating currents such as José de San Martín from the south and Simón Bolívar from the north, Spanish rule was expelled to give way to the First Republic of Peru. During the early years of the Republic, there were significant confrontations with also new neighboring countries due to discrepancies in the boundaries established by the Spaniards. Among them, the War of the Peruvian-Bolivian Confederation between 1836 and 1839 stands out, which confronted the created Peruvian-Bolivian Confederation with the Republic of Northern Peru, which was supported by Chile, and the result was the defeat of the Confederates, and thus the definitive separation of Bolivian territory, leaving the map as such. Following this came the bloody Pacific War between 1839 and 1884, which originated in the first instance due to territorial discrepancies between Bolivia and Chile, but due to the secret treaty of defensive alliance signed between Bolivia and Peru. The latter also participated after Chile declared war on it. The event took place in two campaigns. The first, maritime, where the Peruvian of the millennium, Admiral Miguel Grau, stands out, and later the land campaign, which ends with the invasion of Lima by the Chilean army, and thus the surrender of Peru. The outcome was roughly 10,000 casualties, the definite cession of the Tarapacá region to Chile, and the occupation of Arica and Tacna, leaving Peru in complete devastation. What a shame, isn't it? Tired that Peru lost so much territory? I'm sorry, but there's still more to come. In 1909, Peru renounced sovereignty over the Amazon region of Acre to Brazil, without any conflict through the Velarde-Rio Branco Treaty, leaving the map like this. It has shrunk quite a bit, hasn't it? Wait, something encouraging is coming. Do you recall Arica and Tacna going to Chile? Well, in 1929, Tacna returns to Peru through the signing of the Treaty of Lima, thus recovering part of the territory lost during the Pacific War. With this, and with some border agreements with Colombia through the Salomon-Lozano Treaty of 1922, which was rectified after a brief war between both nations in 1933, the map of Peru is thus. Wow, we are getting closer to what the current map is. And I think I'm forgetting someone. Ah, right, the other neighbor to the north, Ecuador. Well, with them, the borders were not fully delimited until 1942 after the Peruvian-Ecuadorian War, which culminated with the Rio de Janeiro Protocol, where Peru ratified its sovereignties over the disputed territories. So finally, the map of Peru would be as we know it today. I believe I've discussed territorial history extensively, neglecting a bit of Peruvian people's history. Well, during the 20th century, there were multiple governments, such as the Leguillas Oncenio in the 20s, militarism in the 30s, the return to democracy in the 40s, and a period of oligarchy during the 50s. But ultimately, one of the most controversial rulers in history was Juan Velasco Alvarado, who came to power after a coup and ruled from the late 60s until 1975. He is well known for implementing the well-known agrarian reform, which broadly speaking was based on the exploration of millions of hectares of the settled lands to allocate them to the peasant communities. While many people agreed with this due to the egregious labor abuses committed against the peasants, the truth is that this generated a huge external debt that laid the groundwork for the subsequent economic crisis of the 80s, to which was added the questioned management of President Alan Garcia, under whom hyperinflation rose to levels never seen before, and Peru was considered among the poorest countries in the world. To top it off, various revolutionary groups began to grow in response to the population's discontent, influenced by extreme left-wing regimes, such as the Soviet and Cuban ones. That's right. By this I mean Shining Path and MRTA, which plunged the country into a dark era of terrorism where around 70,000 people lost their lives. The peak expansion of these terrorist groups occurred in 1990, taking over all this space. But don't worry, like all terror regimes, this one also had to fall, and it was during the presidency of Alberto Fujimori that both insurgent groups were finally defeated. The renowned 1997 Operation Chavin de Huantar is highlighted here. Unfortunately, later on, signs of corruption and human rights violations were found by President Fujimori and his advisor, Vladimir Montesinos, which led him to resign months into his third term in the year 2000. He was succeeded by new governments, which, while they have kept the economy stable and constantly growing, all of these have been questioned for being involved in one of the biggest corruption scandals in history, whose protagonist is the Brazilian company Odebrecht. Scandal for which even President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski had to resign due to a possibility of vacancy for moral incapacity and was succeeded by Vice President Martin Vizcarra. We have arrived at the present. Thank you.